and welcome to DCB. I don't believe we've got any fire alarms planned today, so if fire alarm sounds, it's out through the entrance that we came in through. Do we have any apologies for absence?
We got two actually, Chair. Councillor Windows, his substitute is Councillor Eddy, and Councillor O'Rourke, her substitute is Councillor Francis.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Do we have any declarations of interest for today's agenda? No, brilliant, thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting. Any issues with that, or are we happy to agree it? No, good, great. Okay, so item number 5, action sheet. Gary? That one for you? No, there's one for Norman, isn't it?
There's nothing more to report on there. No. It's the same as last week.
Fabulous. Oh, Norman, can I remind you to speak into your microphone as well, please? Maybe. Okay. Item number 6. Gary.
Thank you, Chair. On appeals, just getting the report up, there's 2 or 3 things I just wanted to bring to the committee's attention. Apologies, I've just lost the document now because I've moved locations. Bear with me a moment. Okay, apologies. Sorry, it's showing me a blank document at the moment.
Do you want us to move on to enforcement first?
I'll have the same problem, unfortunately.
Okay.
Here we go. Right, I've opened it properly now. Okay. Right, so the report before you're on appeals is the usual collection of appeals lodged and decisions received as well. There's decisions, in terms of those lodged, there's 1 or 2 I just wanted to bring to your attention. The first one is item 30, which is on page 19 of the papers. Members will be very familiar with this one. This is the proposals involving the Windmill pub, of course, in Windmill Hill. Just as you can note from that, you may know already, an appeal against the refusal that was issued by the committee has now been lodged. So that's undergoing the kind of written representation process at the moment. So once there's a further update on that in terms of the decision, clearly we will let you know as soon as possible. Then we're on to then appeal decisions, and this is one at the top of page 21, item 40. And this is one that's been in the public inquiry section for quite some time, because this was one, in fact, rather than being an appeal, this was a called-in application by the Secretary of State. So this was a decision made by DCB during the last municipal year, where the committee decided to grant or to resolve to grant permission for the use of the former police dog and horse training centre on Clanage Road as a new site for the caravan club. It was subject to a objection by the Environment Agency on flooding grounds, so therefore the Secretary of State called it in for determination. So an inquiry was held last year, and the decision was made by the Secretary of State in the last 2 to 3 weeks. Overall, so where shall I start? The planning inspector, who heard all the evidence and chaired the inquiry, carefully considered all the issues, and their advice on balance was that despite the flooding concerns, but reassured by, I think, the provisions for emergency evacuation, the planning inspector actually recommended to the Secretary of State that permission could be granted. However, the Secretary of State took into account all of that in a very carefully worded decision letter. The Secretary of State decided that planning permission should be refused. The Secretary of State gave more weight to the concerns of the Environment Agency and felt that, contrary to his inspector, the planning Secretary of State, felt that permission should be refused on safety grounds and flooding grounds. So that was a decision that was made a little while ago, 17th of March. So that's one notable decision. The other one as well in terms of this committee is item 50 on page 22 of the papers. And this relates to 46 riding lease. Members may recall this one. I think you considered this one in October last year and you resolved to refuse permission. It's a proposal for a change of use from a shop to a hot food takeaway, and the committee felt that it would create an over-concentration of hot food takeaway uses in that particular shopping rank. The inspector considered the appeal under written representations, had regard to the neighbourhood plan policy, but felt that overall the additional one hot food takeaway would not in itself lead to an over-concentration of those types of uses within the local centre, and therefore allowed the appeal. So another decision in relation to an appeal following a decision made by the committee. So yes, things have been quite active on the appeal front, Chair, and so that's my update this time around. Happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you. Any questions on that? I've got one from Guy and one from Richard, or the other way around, whichever. What have you?
I'll pass largely over the Clanage Road decision. It won't be the first time government or its agencies have given a confused decision, and it won't be the last in my view. But turning to item 5, writing lease, personally, I do regret it because I seem to recall we were unanimous. Members actually also listened and gave serious weight to the local neighbourhood plan, consulted on by local people. And obviously the inspectorate seemed fit to utterly overturn that. So personally, I regret it, but of course one has to accept it. One question for Gary, item 56, page 23, 60 Lewis Road in my ward. Can he give us any more information why the a refusal was overturned?
On that one, Chair, I don't know the details, but what I can do following this meeting is have a look at that, and I can also send the decision notice to Councillor Eddy if that would help.
Thank you. Guy.
Just a very quick and very parochial one, I'm afraid, Chair. It's just item 52. It just struck me as peculiar, the 8 Chandos Road application, an appeal against non-determination that was overturned with no costs. I was just wondering what had happened there. Had we determined it while the paperwork was in flight, or what happened?
I'm sorry, which number?
Oh, sorry, 52.
52. Yes, again, sorry, I have to admit, I don't know the detail of that one, so equally I can have a look at that, because what there will be, alongside the decision to dismiss the appeal, there will be also the inspector deciding not to award costs and their reasons for doing so. So, yeah, this will be an interesting read for me as well. I mean, in general, the council not reaching a decision within the statutory period or within an agreed period isn't in itself considered to be unreasonable behaviour, although appellants quite often will try and make that case. So it will be interesting to see the inspector's reasons for not awarding costs, really. The fact that the inspector wasn't prepared to grant permission for the development would have helped that as well. And I think just a delay in itself, whilst regrettable, isn't in itself unreasonable grounds. So, but yeah, I can certainly forward those decisions to Councillor Pulteney as well.
Great, thank you very much. And enforcement, please, Gary.
Thank you, Chair. On enforcement notices, I'm pleased to say we've got 3 listed this time around. 2 of them probably have hit the report later than anticipated. A few inputting issues that have led to us unreporting these recently, which we're looking into. The 2 in question are in Brislington West, so Wyvale, but they're both are effectively the same site, the Wyvale Garden Centre. As often happens with enforcement notices, though, we've just received notice of appeals against those notices as well. So they won't come into effect until the appeals have been determined. But I'm glad to say that the planning inspectorate have turned around the appeals quite quickly. So we've got the timelines for submitting of evidence for those now. And also the appeals will be dealt with through written representations, which is the most cost-effective way of deciding them. And again, once we've got the decisions on those appeals, we'll report that to both committees as an enforcement update.
Great, thank you. I take it no questions on that? Nope, brilliant. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to move to the public forum. And so I'll call everybody up one by one. If you come up to the microphone, if you're wearing a mask, if you could take it off to speak, that would be great. And you'll have 1 minute to speak. We've got a lovely little traffic light system here where it starts off green for the first, when you've got a whole minute, down to 30 seconds it goes amber, and then when it goes red, that's your time up, and I'll start waving at you. And if you could wind up, that would be fabulous. Thank you very much. Okay, so first up we have Lee Madden, please.
Hello. So it would make a huge difference if you could please remove at least the top 2 stories from the tallest block on the grounds that it's just too close to existing homes. They're intending to build right up to the pavement and the boundary line, just yards from the nearest houses. So it would be 6 stories towering over 2-storey homes, right up in our faces, leading to loss of privacy and overshadowing. I know at the last meeting there was a feeling because next door development had already been approved at a higher height, that may have set some sort of precedent, but the actual buildings next door are set much further back within their site, away from our houses and windows, so it really won't be as bad. And I do think if you were to agree to reduce the height of this development tonight and the developer later tried to appeal on the grounds next door was taller, I do think you could defend that on the grounds that they made sure next door the buildings were further away and not up in our faces on top of us, casting a shadow over us like this development would. Also, we'd like you to remove the yellow line from Durnford Street because we really need to park there. Okay.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Okay, next up, Ben Larkham, please.
Good start. Dear members, further to the motion to defer this application in January, the applicant has worked positively with officers to respond to your stated concerns. The application has been amended to include the following: the provision of a lift within Core B to serve the affordable dwellings and alterations to the external elevation to ensure the access is indistinguishable from the access to Core A. The allocation of parking for the affordable dwellings on a commensurate basis to the market dwellings, including an accessible space. Clarifications on the submitted plans to confirm that the communal courtyard is accessible to all future occupants, including the affordable dwellings. The officer's recommendation is the result of an extensive positive negotiation between the LPA and the applicant over a 2-year period, including pre-applications. In conclusion, it is a scheme of high-quality urban regeneration which will deliver much-needed affordable market accommodation in the most sustainable location. I therefore consider that it is worthy of planning permission, and I respectfully ask for your support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then Councillor Christine Townsend, please.
So thank you, committee. I've put my statement in, but I've got 4 main points that I'd like to just draw out of that. Please test your duties under the Public Sector Duty Requirement in the Equalities Act that were raised in January. If you're not satisfied, then please push for these conditions if you so choose to pass this development. I think there's a piece of learning for the planning department officers It was the elected members that kind of was the backstop in terms of the Equalities Act, and I know that earlier on we were asking for clarification around this. But if we are looking to give planning permissions for 10-year blind developments, then they need to be blind to the tenure that is within those developments. The parking is by far the biggest issue raised by the residents in the area. This is about 200 metres from Ashton Gate. We've got year after year after year of residents asking for parking controls in this area. Please, if you choose to grant this, can you put in a future point from the conditions and reserves and advises policy, point 1045A, which means if and when parking conditions restrictions come in, this address is specifically excluded from that. And please ask that that is then promoted and people realise that if we get parking conditions in this area, this particular address will be excluded from that. And I'd just like to make a point about engagement.
I'm really sorry, Christine.
Okay.
You've run out of time.
Okay, and can we just listen to the residents? Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll move now to the officer presentation. Councillors, you've been sent a slide pack from Gary that has all the slides, so that if you can't quite see the screen, you can see it on your laptop. Thank you very much. Over to you, Andy.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So, just by way of a recap, because this scheme was brought to you in January, the site relates to this red line area here between Durnford Street and Bainton Road. It joins the old brewery site, which recently got planning permission for mixed use but predominantly residential. And there's an aerial shot for you. It's currently occupied by industrial and commercial units, and the proposed application, here's a few site photographs just to jog your memory, although you will have seen these last time. A proposal for 33 flats in a 6-storey block and a terrace of 7 townhouses, along with a commercial unit on the ground floor. So the scheme was previously considered in January by members, and it was thought that the affordable housing should be better integrated into the wider scheme and the facilities for the affordable units improved. So the scheme was deferred from that committee. Key points for members at that stage were that lift access should be provided to the affordable units. Car parking, including accessible parking, should be provided for the affordable units. That the entrances should be of equal standing to the market units and affordable ones. All residents should have access to the communal garden, and also that a balcony should be provided for the unit that does not have one. In response to the concerns, there's a 3D visualization I should have shown you before. In response to the concerns raised, amendments have been made to the scheme. So we're still in a situation with 2 separate cores, which from a registered landlord perspective is preferable in terms of affordable housing provision. And we have Core A, which serves the market flats in this location, and Core B, which serves the affordable units in this location. The lobby has been enlarged to Core B and a lift incorporated that serves all levels. And this has been at the cost of a parking space in this Undercroft area. However, it's been replaced in this external area. There are 2 accessible parking spaces specifically allocated to the affordable units, so these 2 here. It's also confirmed that this communal garden is accessible to all. And if I go onto the floor plans, so you can see it's these units at the top of the screen here, which are the affordable units, all accessible by the lift that's been put in. There is still remaining 1 affordable unit that doesn't have a balcony, which is this one here. The reason being that that is oversailing the highway beneath it. So it's for safety really, to prevent sort of interference if sort of high-sided vehicles need to manoeuvre in this space to the front. There are other units in the market housing that also don't have balconies, so it's a similar proportion between affordable and market. It was also queried whether this courtyard to the rear could be landscaped and parking provided. This hasn't been possible because there are rights of access across it to a number of surrounding units, and the developer simply doesn't have the right to do whatever they want with this space. It is a shared space. So this is an elevation through the site, so the side elevation. This is the entrance area to Core B, which serves the affordable units, and it has been amended so that it is similar in size, design, appearance, signage to the other entrance which serves the market units. And then there's a CGI here just to give an idea of how that Core B entrance would look. I've also been asked to just provide some slides showing the proposed development in the context of its surroundings. So this is viewed from Durnford Street. In sort of outline here is the approved development on the old brewery site, and with the sort of industrial nature buildings beside. And then these are sections through the site. So this is the flatted block outlined with this dotted line. The townhouses proposed in section there. This is the rear portion of the flatted block. So this element here again is the neighbouring site, the old brewery. And these houses, I think this view is the rear of Durnford Avenue properties. And then down here you can see the Ashville Road properties as well. So you get comparison of the scale there. So that's it in terms of my summary of the amendments made. Obviously, I would welcome any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there's lots of questions. I'm going to ask a question first, and then I'm going to take Richard, and then I'm assuming that was Fabian's hand waving over there. Can you give us more information around the service yard and the usage of it and the times of the day that on week when it would be being used, and what by, please?
Yeah, of course. So this yard at the rear, in fact, if I get an aerial view up, might make it clearer to see. Yeah, so this area here is that shared yard, and to the rear it is providing access across it to this property here, which it's a gymnasium and fitness centre, and then this neighbouring building here is an arboricultural services. I think it's Ashcroft Tree Services in this building here. This sort of area of wasteland, if you like, is part of the neighbouring development. So 2 houses are approved on here as part of the old brewery scheme. And if I come around here, so this large warehouse is part of our application site, as are these along the Durnford Street frontage. This industrial building would be being removed. That's part of the neighbouring site. This one with the white roof would remain, although that doesn't specifically take its access off this shared space. And then there are also a couple of accesses to residential units on that front Ashton Road here. So it's a mix of uses. You know, I don't think, other than I think this arboricultural unit, you know, large vehicles are not going to be regularly attending other than for servicing. This here would also provide one of the accesses, including a car park access into the neighbouring old brewery development. Then I think it's worth noting on the other side of the site, along Durnford Street, I would suggest there is a similar, if not greater, amount of vehicle movement. Have a brewery at the end here, so they'll be taking their deliveries and also distributing via Durnford Street. There's a furniture warehouse and an upholsterers as well, existing businesses. Obviously these businesses would be going if this development is approved, so these would become residential. There's also the servicing associated with the surrounding residential properties from Durnford Street.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so then Richard and then Fabian, please.
Obviously, I'm a substitute today, so I wasn't here in January, but I have read the reports and minutes and viewed the YouTube footage, of course. Just for the purposes of clarity, can you confirm that the committee today is considering just the 5 bullet points listed on page 28 and other matters such as principal design, transport and residential amenity were considered in January?
I think following the deferral, whilst the committee's focus should be on those reasons for deferral, technically the application is undetermined, and previously the committee didn't make a partial resolution or partial decision. So all issues are there for consideration today, but clearly following the deferral, in terms of process, the committee should focus on those areas that were deferred. But I can't say that members can't consider the issues beyond that.
I think I can sort of further clarify that we kind of focused on the biggest problems that the committee found in the last application, but didn't really have much conversation or consideration of the other issues. So I think it's all up for consideration in my view. Fabian?
Thank you, Chair. One of the points that was raised in the public forum was the issue of the height of the building. Now, I know we did discuss the height in relation to the properties next, the new development that's got permission next door. Was that, just to be clear, was that one of the reasons we asked for deferral? I don't think it was.
We did discuss it, but I don't think it was a...
No, I don't believe it was specifically deferred on that point, but it was a matter that was discussed by members.
Yeah, so I think we didn't express enthusiasm about it, so I think it would be fair to sort of consider it properly in this committee.
Chair, yes, certainly. Yeah, it was a specific issue that members raised when resolving to defer last time, but it's still an issue that you need to consider before making a decision.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
Another quick point, the issue of the yellow line that's proposed in the development, are there any sort of policies that would prevent us, if we were so minded, to remove that line?
There's a yellow line proposed along with a traffic regulation order, which is at the advice of our highways colleagues. The reason being is that would then reserve a space on Durnford Street to allow the servicing of the ground floor commercial unit without blocking the highway. I know last time members noted that the proposed TRO hours didn't align with the hours recommended in terms of permissible servicing of the commercial unit. So now those have been aligned. So it's proposed that there's a TRO for loading and servicing only between 8 and 8 AM and PM for the commercial unit. And then at all other times, that space is available for residential parking.
Thanks. Guy, then Andrew.
Just another question relating to what came out of the public forum. One of the suggestions was to preclude this, or preclude the dwellings involved here from any future residence parking scheme that may or may not happen. Just sort of passive prohibition, I guess. Does such a legal device exist? Is that something that is within the gift of this committee?
Yes, it is, and I believe there is already a conditional advice set out to that effect in the papers.
Okay, these aren't the questions I came with, so I'll save those for the moment. But on the subject of the yellow line, what is the extent of the yellow line? Is it merely outside the proposed commercial unit?
We haven't got an agreed highway works plan, so that would be secured as part of the Section 278 agreement, which is effectively a highways legal agreement. So the Section 106, if this is approved, would pin down the payment for that traffic regulation order, and then there will also be a requirement for an agreed plan with our highways authority as to the exact position and extent of that yellow line.
The reason I asked is because we're going from a situation where there's 2 access points within the red line boundary as the things stand to where there will be 1 plus the whatever length of yellow line is agreed. So it might not actually make a significant difference to the availability of on-street parking. The questions I came with, one was with regards to provision of electric points for charging points for vehicles. How is the future management of those determined? Is that merely down to the management of the block of flats itself, i.e. there's 4 that, I think it's 4 that are installed to start with, but with passive ducting ready for future ones when they're required?
Yeah, and I think the infrastructure will be put in place as set out within the application, and then from that point it would be management of the property, and I'm sure there'll be service charges associated with upkeep that in the future may be used to extend that EV charging as and when necessary.
Yeah. Okay. So that's down to the market pressures between the residents and the. And the other question I had was.
Hold on a second. I think
sorry.
Gary wanted just to come back a little bit of added information for your question.
It was only just to briefly add on the traffic regulation order issue, the yellow lines. Whichever decision the committee make today isn't the final word on that. There will be the usual statutory process for the TRO, including local consultation. So I just wanted to kind of add that as reassurance.
Great, thank you. So then, on to your next.
Thanks for that, Gary. Okay, the alterations to recommended conditions section says that the previously proposed conditions are set out and they're replicated with 2 exceptions, which are cited as being conditions 13 and 48, which are changed because of changes to the references within them. However, when you read through the list, there isn't a condition 48 on the newly published list, but there was the last time this came to our committee. So I'm wondering what condition has disappeared.
You are correct. I'll have to look into that and figure out which one has come off and why. I haven't intentionally removed any conditions from last time.
Have anything accidentally been amalgamated or doubly numbered?
I'll have to do a bit of compare and contrast and come back to you.
Do we need to do some hoarding questions whilst you compare and contrast? Okay, right. I'm going to ask a question about, so on the public forum, they weren't here to speak it, but the third one has lots of very, questions around overshadowing of the commercial units. And it highlights things like light being shut out from their skylights, but particularly a balcony over the top of some of their windows. So if you can, that's not really a hoarding question. That's going to need probably more attention from Andy in a minute. But also about the ventilation systems, which will be extracting fumes in close proximity to the residential. It is page 11 on my public forum.
I'm just trying to find that, Chair, because obviously Andy's looking at the conditions. Which bullet point was that one?
It was, hold on, so I've got on page 11,
Yeah.
the first one starts with our property is designated
Yeah.
as a work live unit, and then the second one, ground floor, has the balcony as part of it, and it's the third one down with the ventilation and the extraction, fume extraction.
Yeah, it's hard to comment in detail, Chair, but just, you know, we would have assessed the impact on properties to kind of form our recommendation, really, and that, you know, on having looked at that on balance, we would recommend approval. So I don't think there's been a specific overshadowing study with the property in question, because I think it was largely commercial. I know there's reference here to it being a live-work unit, but you know, on balance, we feel that the impact of the development is acceptable.
Okay, well, maybe in a minute when we've got Andy's attention, we can have a little look at that on the plans. Maybe as well, a couple more bullet points down. It highlights the 8 units out of the 40 being affordable, which is 20% over the target of 30. Maybe you could tell us about that as a holding.
Yeah, I can certainly cover that one, Chair. I think it came up last time around. Overall, the local plan policy position, this area falls within the 30% area, subject to viability, of course. For a while, on the back of I think the Bedminster Green framework, there was a temporary relaxation of that to 20% to accord with the other parts of the city that are subject to the affordable housing practice note. However, it was a temporary relaxation, and it has been decided by the council's executive to end that temporary relaxation. So therefore, as we sit today, the requirement in policy is 30%, but subject to viability. We have had regard, in terms of making our recommendation, we've had regard to the fact that when the application was made, the 20% position was in place, and it was uncertain as to whether that would be extended or be brought back up to 30%. So we feel it's a reasonable position to accept the provision of 8, because it meets the 20%. There'll still be a performance requirement on the development to deliver quickly. Otherwise, that'll trigger a viability review, which may push up the 20%. And I think just from experience locally and the situation, I don't think would have got any easier given increased build costs and so on. We feel that even were we to go through a full viability appraisal situation to try and get to 30%, our gut instinct is that we'd probably land at around 20%, if not lower, actually. So technically, your policy position today, making a decision, is 30%. This is proposing 20%, but the rationale behind that was that was the kind of the policy window at that point in time of making the application. So it's a matter of judgment, really, for the committee in terms of what you feel is reasonable in making your decision today.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anybody else have any holding questions for Gary? Go on, Fabian. I know you can.
Right. The missing condition, and apologies, was the requirement for the provision of a waste management plan. Now, I've unintentionally left that off the latest list of conditions, but I would recommend that that is included as a condition. And while going through, just to confirm that the advice is on the list of advices relating to no parking permits if a residence parking zone is put in force in the future.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brown. You win the prize for the best reading of the papers. Okay, can we return to the question around extraction and the commercial unit that's close by, and the skylights. I don't know if you're listening to my question.
I didn't really hear the question, if you don't mind repeating
So
it.
on page 11 of the public forum, it's a statement from a commercial live-work unit next door, and they are concerned about overshadowing from the building, but are particularly concerned by the ventilation systems and their fume extraction being kind of compromised by the residential units in close proximity. Wondering if you could point that out
So
on the plans.
the neighbouring unit is concerned that their extraction is being compromised.
Yeah, so it seems
Sorry,
like...
I wasn't provided with the public forum for some reason, so I
okay.
haven't actually seen the comments.
So it is... Do you want to have a little look at it on my laptop? Or, you got it. So they're a live-work unit next door, northeast, it seems, from what I can work out. Unit 5, the old brewery. No, Unit D, because I can't read properly.
I mean, in all honesty, I haven't undertaken an assessment of potential impact on neighbouring extraction systems. If that is the gist of the concern raised.
Yeah, so they seem to be, it's a live-work unit, and in their, what have they got? They've said they've got free sole traders use the commercial studios downstairs, and they have laser cutters, spray painting and fume extraction, and they're used on a daily basis. Their concern appears to be that wherever those ventilation fumes are going to be funneled are going to be into people's residential units. So, can you...
Yeah, Environmental Health have looked at the application, but the conditions put on relate to the unit proposed and mitigating any potential impact from that, rather than the other way around. I mean, there are agents of change principles in terms of, if future residents complain about this, it shouldn't result in their business being closed, but at the same time, if there is a neighbouring business that is producing nuisance fumes and they're beyond levels that are acceptable in pollution control terms, then the appropriate council team would have to look at that, and if their extract system isn't fit for purpose, there may need to be intervention there.
That seems like a slightly problematic solution. They also say that they're live-work units, so they also live there too. Are you able to show us on the plans where Unit D of the old brewery is, by any chance?
No. This is the first time I've heard this.
Yeah.
Unit D of the old brewery. So that's the neighbouring property.
That's what it says on here somewhere. Yeah, I think I found it. It's just here, according to Google Maps. Just it's sort of opposite the junction with Ashville Road. Yeah.
Okay, so it looks like it's this unit here, D unit gallery. I'm afraid I don't have an answer to that question. I would need to consult with our pollution team for a definitive answer on extract from that unit. It's a new one on me, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions? No. Okay, great. Shall we move to the debate stage of this? Richard first, please.
I knew that DCB would be challenging, Chairman, but it seems that it actually is drawing blood, so that was something I didn't expect. Seriously, though, the role of this committee or any DC committee is not to redesign an application in committee, but in my view, it fulfilled its primary purpose, which was in January to listen to the concerns of the neighbours and to raise those concerns. Then it went back to the applicant, and the applicant came back with some negotiated solution. And it's for us to judge whether the improvements are sufficient. Looking at page 29, they are. List is now proposed to access all the affordable units. The Core B lobby has been enlarged. 2 accessible parking spaces are allocated. The entrance has been expanded. And all residents have access to the communal garden as we requested. In addition, the proposed TRO and conditions are amended as we raised. There were 3 things which they didn't believe they could make progress on. The balcony is not possible for one affordable housing unit due to the overselling of the highway land. Parking provision stays at 18 spaces because there isn't room to expand beyond that. And the landscaping to the rear square is not possible due to access rights across it. So it seems to me these are the issues the applicant has made progress on and has actually improved. In my view, it overwhelmingly meets the committee's reservation to January, and on that basis I think this is an acceptable scheme and we should approve it, which I'll be voting to do later.
Thank you for explaining how a committee works, Richard. I'm still not a man. Fabian.
Hello. Yeah, thank you. I do think that, the whole point of sending stuff, sending applications back to have issues addressed is to give the developer the opportunity to address them. And the key issues that we've raised have been addressed. And I think on a degree of reasonableness, we now have to say, okay, we asked you to, we can't on one committee say, oh, deal with these 5 things, and then when they deal with them, say, okay, we need a couple more things looked at as well. We want you to do this, do that. They went, we gave them a shopping list of things to address. They've addressed all the ones they can. The flat that it's not physically possible to put a balcony in gets a Juliet balcony, so that's at least gives it some open space. So, yeah, I think, degree of reasonableness, we've asked them to make changes, they've done that. I think, that puts us in a position where it would be unreasonable for us to not to approve it now. So, and it does at least provide us with some affordable housing. We've got, the big conversation last time was about the lack of the lift, the fact that that's been addressed, the fact that the parking space has been provided for the affordable units. Those are the key things. And I think, we now have to say, okay, you've been reasonable and listened to what we've had to say, so we'll be reasonable, give you permission. I think that's the only way we can deal with it now. So I'll be supporting it.
Guy? And then Andrew.
I'm torn, Chair. I appreciate I was not here for the previous meeting of the committee that deferred this, and I would completely agree with what's been said so far. The issues raised by the previous committee do seem to largely have been addressed. Parking seems to be a massive problem. The condition proposed in the public forum seems to have been used to ensure that this will be a low car ownership building, whatever happens. That's good. That said, what else I've heard in public forum, and my own impression on reading the papers, was the thing is huge. It will absolutely dominate the space that it's in. And these concerns seem to have not caught the eye of the previous committee, although they have come back again in public forum. I am slightly worried about the agent of change implications of putting a residential unit in amongst commercial units, particularly given the kind of industry that's being done in those commercial units, even if they are live-work spaces. I need to be convinced, Chair, and I am convinced on the points of deferral, but I'm not convinced on those, and those remain. So I put it to the other members of the committee. You've got to persuade me.
Thanks, Chair. Having read the papers, I'd come back to this committee expecting to support the amended proposals, because I believe they have addressed, to my satisfaction, the points raised at the previous meeting. I am concerned about the issue of ventilation, and I've noted the comments on scale from residents. I mean, I would note on that the core A, the upper stories of core A are set back from the street, and I've visited the site, and whilst it's obviously going to be taller than the existing buildings, I don't think it's sufficiently so to change my view that overall the scheme now proposed compared to last time is acceptable, so I'll be supporting.
I'm quite concerned still about the ventilation issue, because I don't really like the idea that we could be pulling a neighbouring business out of business. So what kind of conditions can we put on to mitigate that?
It's difficult, Chair, really, because conditions can only deal with the development that's being considered for permission, really. So it can't require the applicants to... sorry, just make sure my computer does not restart. Snooze, right? I'm out of action for this meeting. It can't require, say, a development to upgrade a neighbouring property's ventilation system for the benefit of that development. You know, that's been kind of explored elsewhere, but not really kind of delivered anywhere, because agent of change has been a kind of a big issue around the country for a little while now. We can't say that we've got a full assessment of the impact of that existing commercial use on these new residential units, because, you know, until the public forum statement was received, we didn't know it was a specific issue. Clearly, we knew that this was a case of bringing residential into a mixed-use area, and my advice on the basis of what we've got before us at this point in time is that we have to advise you on this would just slightly change that mix. It's a mixed-use area anyway, and this just brings more residential development into that situation, and it still is the responsibility of individual businesses to have suitable ventilation anyway. There are residential properties still quite close already to that development of properties at the end of Ashfield Road. So that's my advice, Chair, but clearly the committee have to decide which way to go on this one, really.
And can you confirm the conditions that we're potentially adding on the table for consideration?
It's one condition which relates to the provision of a waste management plan. So the original report should have been appended to all the papers. And on the original report, that was condition 33, which in error I have not copied across to the new one, but it should have been copied across. So it's the provision of a waste management plan, which was previously condition 33. I would suggest that should still be on there if permission is granted.
And what about conditions around sort of future-proofing the parking and parking zones and that sort of thing, as raised by Councillor Townsend?
So it's already on there as an advice on both sets of papers. So it's an advice that if there is a residence parking zone in the area, then residents of this development wouldn't be eligible for permits.
Could I respectfully move the officer's recommendation to approve with the additional waste management plan condition you want to add?
I believe we had another hand over there. Lorraine, did you want to speak?
Yeah, I just wanted to, and I think I'm just new to planning, but I've lived where there's been planning issues. So I want to acknowledge the issue around the eye. I know this area really well because I used to teach at Workout, so I actually know that road and I know the area really well actually. So the height is, I acknowledge that the height would concern me as well of where the buildings are now and where this is going. But as Councillor Heady said, you know, technically you're not here to sort of critique that, but I think it is an area. There is an exaggeration between the current properties and where it's going, so I do acknowledge that, so I just want to say that.
Thank you very much. So if no one else has got anything to say, then shall we move to a vote following the officer recommendation? Norman, would you like to do it as a roll call?
Oh, do you need someone to second it?
We will do, yeah. But who wants to second it?
I'll second it, but I think, can we turn that advice about, you know, not being eligible for residents for permits if they get it's advice, because you said it was an advisory, or is it now a condition about not being eligible for?
It's on there as an advice. It's the jurisdiction of the local highways authority. So the advice put on here is to advise that the local highways authority would not be allowing future residents of this site to have permits.
And that's as far as we can go.
Yes, it is, because it's not a planning condition can only control planning matters. So this is really it's a clear message to our highways colleagues that, you know, if there is an RPZ in this area and the permit applications, they can't be, or they shouldn't be granted for this area. So it's something that's been examined quite recently, and the system does work in that regard. So yeah, it can't be any stronger than an advice note.
Okay, well in that case, I'm happy to second.
Okay, thank you very much. I think Norma's going to do a roll call.
Okay, so those in favour, please. 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 in favour. Those against? 1, 2, 3 against. And abstention? Okay, thank you. So that is carried.
Leslie, are you voting or are you abstaining by not voting? Are you wanting to vote? Yes, I am. Okay. Did you have Leslie's vote?
Yeah.
You did. Okay. So all those in favour?
Okay.
That's 5. Good.
5,
Okay.
yeah.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. So that's carried. Yes. Great. Thank you very much. Do we want to have a quick comfort break before the next item? Quick comfort break. Yep. 10 minutes. Back by 10 past, please. Just waiting for Leslie to return. Are all of our extra public members planning on speaking? Are you planning on speaking? Excellent. Okay. Are you... Did you put two different statements in?
I'm representing myself and the Open Spaces Society.
All right, cheeky ask, okay. Okay, are we all back? Great. All right, we'll get started again with the public toilets up on the Downs. So, first registered to speak, we have Chris excuse me, Goodsall. Is that correct pronunciation? Sorry.
Tell me when. Shall I just go? So I just wanted to emphasise that this is the reapplication because the existing permission that was granted by this committee 3 years ago has expired. So the reasons for that are that we ran into problems with the process during the COVID period when everything kind of slowed down. The critical thing that we now have that we were trying to get in that period was the approval from the Secretary of State to build on the Downs, and that has been granted, doesn't have a time limit on it. So the reasons why the Downs Committee would like to build the cafe remain exactly the same. They want to re-provide the WCs to a better standard, and they want to provide some ongoing funding to assist with the £15,000 a year cost of upkeep that provides, so that they can continue to provide that service and other services on the Downs. Thanks.
Fabulous, thank you very much. Then, next on my list are the councillors for Stoke Bishop, but I can't see any of them here, so we'll skip past them for a moment and go to Susan Carter, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for allowing me 2 minutes because I'm speaking on behalf of the National Open Spaces Society and on my own behalf. And as a walker, I can make it clear that these toilets do not actually require replacement. They're perfectly useful. People in Bristol often forget how absolutely amazing the Downs are. I couldn't believe they could exist in the heart of a city when I came for a university interview. And the Sneyd Park Residents Association quote an Australian's wonder at the iconic view from the seawalls and his feeling of being in the countryside when walking to it. They're truly world-beating. The Open Spaces Society, which is Britain's oldest conservation body, also sees the seawalls as iconic. They've objected to this proposal because of increased traffic and congestion, visual intrusion, and the risk of non-viability leading to dereliction or a change of use. The Society points to alternatives that now make this development unnecessary. The proposed education centre at the zoo's Clifton site, the likelihood of another cafe there, as well as the potential for expanding the cafe at the water tower. The Open Spaces Society observes that the proposal is contrary to planning policy because of its detrimental impact on the character of the Downs. My objection is on similar grounds. The semi-wild landscape of the Downs is precious and must be protected. The planning officer has failed to take account of a material planning consideration by ignoring the impact on the wider landscape. Walk from the water tower to the seawalls and you have the illusion of being in countryside that stretches on forever. The cafe and the associated increase in traffic would destroy this illusion. The sun reflecting on the glass would draw attention by day. At night, security lights inside and out would compete with the moon and stars in one of Bristol's few dark sky areas. The Downs Committee has lost sight of its statutory purpose in putting forward this proposal. It's not there to run toilets. We look to this committee to show that it's a better grasp of what makes the Downs so wonderful by refusing this application. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And then Mark Ashdown, please.
Thank you. Our concern is solely with regard to biodiversity. In fact, this is the first time this issue, biodiversity and biodiversity net gain, has come before a development committee. It didn't come before the original 2018 application, as far as we can see, even though it was a requirement of planning that biodiversity evidence should be submitted. We have looked at and analysed that. Our statement is before you. Our detailed comments are before you. And I think the salient point, the preliminary ecological report suggests that there will be a 23.55% net gain, but that's wholly dependent on the developers being able to create 200 square metres of native flower-rich grassland meadow in front of, well, we say only can fit in front of the development itself. In our view, this is impractical and unviable. In order to preserve that from people trampling it and people walking on it, you'd have to fence it, and that's contrary to the Act as far as I know. So that's our main points as far as that's concerned. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much. And our councillors for Stoke Bishop aren't here, so we'll move on to the public forum, please, David. Oh, and for this, we've got updated slides in your inbox as well. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, everybody. So I'm just going to run through this presentation relatively quickly for you. So we've already heard a little bit of background to the application, but just to recap, this application is a resubmission of an application which was previously decided by this committee in March 2019, 3 years ago. That application received 106 objections and 37 comments in support. The committee resolved to grant planning permission on that occasion with 8 votes in favour and 2 against. Since this point, the applicant, the Downs Committee, has been required to seek common land consent from the Secretary of State. This has now been granted, as we've heard, and there's been delays to the project due to the pandemic. So this is the reason that the current planning permission for the site has lapsed. So this is the reason we have this resubmission application. The 2019 planning permission only lapsed 3 weeks ago on the 14th of March. So the current application is largely the same development as was previously consented. This is demolition of the existing public toilets at the top of the Downs and replacement of these facilities with a mixed-use building including a cafe, some public toilets and an education booth for use by the Avon Gorge and Downs Wildlife Project. The need for the cafe element of the proposals is generated by the decision of the council to cut wider funding for public toilets in 2018, and since this point the public toilets on the Downs have been funded by the Downs Committee. So the proposals here are to modernise and introduce a cafe element which will generate funding to maintain the public toilets at this location. So the site, if we're not already aware, you can see the seawalls. It's just behind the trees at the rear of the site there. The site is within the Downs Conservation Area, and the Sneyd Park Conservation Area is located to the north. So turning to the other angle, you can see the existing public toilet block there, and the dwelling to the right-hand side of that image to the north of the site is Towerhurst, which is a Grade 2 listed dwelling. The Downs are also designated a Site of Nature Conservation Interest, a local historic park and garden, as well as important open space within the city. The Avon Gorge, which is adjacent to the rear of the site, is designated a Site of Special Scientific Interest, as well as an area of special conservation. This is an image of the existing public toilet block to give you an idea of the existing building. It was constructed in the 1950s and is in a poor state of repair with in need of modernisation. Here are some views a bit further afield, looking across the Downs towards the existing toilet block. You can see that largely, the existing toilet block is screened and blends into the tree line in the background there. And you can also see the lower image is an image of the toilet block from the seawall's viewing point. So these are some visualizations of the proposed building. It's a single-story building. It's constructed with a steel frame. It would be predominantly glazed at both ends with floor-to-ceiling glazing, with a timber structure centrally located which would accommodate the public toilets. You can see the site location in context. The building would be constructed on the site of the existing toilets, broadly, slightly to the south of the existing toilets. And I would highlight that there's a listed fountain in the wall to the south of the building, which is proposed to be enhanced and restored to functioning state as part of the development. So this is the proposed layout plan. You can see the cafe area to one end of the building with a variety of tables and a bar area for serving drinks, etc. The building is surrounded by a timber decking area. There's the 4 toilets in the middle, 3 unisex toilets plus 1 accessible toilet. And at the far end of the building, there's the education booth, which is a relatively small area, but will be used in an outdoor context. You can see the area proposed for enhancement at the opposite end of the building, which is the listed drinking fountain. The public consultation for this application has returned a total of 58 objections and 16 comments in support. We've had objections from both ward councillors for Stoke Bishop. The main issues, we've heard some of them already tonight, but the main issues are the question of whether or not it's appropriate to develop on the Downs at all, given its status as an open space. There's concerns being raised about the impact of the character and appearance of the Downs, concerns raised in relation to whether or not the cafe would overly commercialise the Downs. It's been questioned whether or not there is a need for a cafe at this location, or whether or not there's demand to sustain a cafe viably at this location. Concerns have also been raised in relation to potential litter from the cafe, light and noise pollution also. Concerns raised in relation to additional vehicles accessing the site and whether or not there's enough parking in the area to accommodate additional visitors to the area. Concerns also raised in relation to biodiversity and trees and the impact to these green infrastructure assets. And the final point, which has been an objection as well, is in relation to the Downs Act. So that's the Act of Parliament, which protects and summarise were raised in relation to the previous application also, but have been submitted again in relation to this current application. So the assessment of officers is consistent with the previous application. The recommendation of officers will be to grant permission. We do understand the concerns of residents in relation to development on the Downs. We place a lot of value on the significance of the Downs, and clearly any development on the Downs is exceptional in nature. However, there are provisions within national and local planning policy which allow for development of open space in certain circumstances. So this happens when development is considered to be ancillary to the open space use, and development is for alternative sports and recreation provision. And it's officers' assessment that in this case, the proposals would be ancillary to the use of the open space, and the proposals would also be related to sports and recreational provision, which are the main purposes of the Downs for leisure and recreation. So we feel that the cafe, the public toilets and the education booth would all be linked into those fundamental uses of the open space. There's a variety of benefits associated with the proposals. The proposals will keep the existing toilets open and maintain them as an asset on the Downs, which will allow more people to visit the Downs comfortably. The toilets will be upgraded. There'll be modern toilets rather than the existing facilities which are in poor condition. This will further improve the equality of access to the open space. The cafe would enhance visitor experience in the view of officers, encouraging users of the Downs to spend more time there and access the Downs more frequently. The education booth would improve awareness and understanding of issues in relation to nature and conservation. So there is a package of benefits here which officers find are sufficient to outweigh the loss of the open space in this case. In relation to other planning issues, the building is found to be an improvement on the existing toilet block in terms of its appearance. It's a low-profile structure. Whilst it's larger than the existing building, it does have a number of improvements in terms of its general design. It's a lot more public-facing. You've got a lot of glazing in there. The doors are in the fronts of the building rather than the rears, which will generally improve the environment on the Downs. The proposals to refurbish the listed water fountain also weigh in favour of the development. So officers are satisfied that the development will preserve and enhance the status of the Downs as a conservation area. The cafe is noted to be 1.2 kilometres from the other cafe on the Downs at the Water Tower, and it's 1.4 kilometres from White Ladies Road. So there's not a great deal of cafes in this area. It's not found that there would be an over-proliferation of cafes. The location is found to be attractive, and it's felt likely that a cafe in this location would be successful, but the building could be adapted in the unlikely event that a cafe were to fail at this location. There are proposals to include bins within the development, and they would be in addition to the bins that are already in the area. There's also conditions recommended attached to the permission to include lighting proposals for the site to control the light emissions from the development, and the same for noise pollution as well, which are felt to be sufficient to safeguard these aspects. Highways are satisfied that parking on Circular Road in the surrounding area can accommodate an increase in traffic associated with the development. The council's ecologist is also satisfied that the development can achieve net gains for biodiversity, and there's a condition attached to the consent to secure a detailed enhancement strategy, securing the detail of exactly what those proposals will be and what degree of net gain they will deliver. And it's noted that the Downs Act is not planning legislation, and the planning application before us this evening cannot be determined on the basis of the Downs Act. So the outcome of this planning application would not prejudice any separate legal processes which are required in relation to the Downs Act. So the officer's recommendation for the application is that permission should be granted. This accounts for the previous planning permission, which only expired a number of weeks ago, and is a material consideration this evening. It's also noted that common land consent has been granted since the previous application. The common land consent process considered many of the same issues as the planning issues, and this is another favour that weighs in favour of the development. It's felt that conditions are sufficient to safeguard the general amenity of the area and any additional impacts of the development. So subject to those, it's recommended that the committee consider the application to be for granting this evening. I'm happy to take any questions, should you have any.
Thank you very much, David. There are questions. Okay, so we'll go Fabian, then Andrew, then Richard, and then Guy, and then Lorraine.
Okay, so apart from the common land permission being granted, what else has changed since the previous application was granted? So are there any material considerations that we have to consider now that weren't on the table in 2019 when this was first approved, please?
So there's very little that's changed. In terms of the development, there's been some minor changes in terms of the proportions of the building, but those are very minor changes and they don't really influence the overall scheme. Since 2019, a new national planning policy framework has been adopted. The local planning documents, the local plan, are the same as they were in 2019, but the new national planning policy framework has been introduced. There are some changes in there, but they don't change the recommendation on the application.
Thank you. Then, Andrew.
Thanks. I'll start with this one. In one of the public forum statements, there's a reference to what's described as Planning Inspectorate report dated 24th of September 2019, which recommended that consent shouldn't be granted. Can you clarify what was the nature of that report and where that fits into the picture?
Okay, so that's in relation to the common land consent process, which is separate to the planning process, but does consider similar issues. There were two applications for common land consent. The first one was refused, and the second one was later granted. I don't know what the time difference between them was, but the application that was granted in November 2020. So the proposal now benefits from common land consent.
So that was going to be my second question, but I think you've already answered it. They don't have to, a new process of common land consent doesn't have to go with the new application. Thanks. I had to have another question, but it slipped my mind at the moment, so if the chair moves on.
We'll come back to you. Okay, Richard, then Guy, then Lorraine.
I've got two questions. Firstly, I was interested in what Mark Ashdown from the Tree Forum said about the biodiversity computations. Does the officer agree with his analysis? And if so, how would that affect your recommendations?
So we've passed on the ecology report that's been submitted to the council to our ecology consultant, and they have returned saying that they believe that the calculation supplied is acceptable, and that the development can provide a net gain for biodiversity. I'm aware that there has been some suggestions that the calculation is incorrect, but the advice that's been provided to me has confirmed that the council's ecologist is happy with the report that's been provided.
I'm really sorry. I'm sorry, we can't have calling out and heckling. No, I'm sorry. You cannot. I'll ask you to leave if you continue. I have sympathy with you, but you cannot start calling out because it will turn into chaos. Again, I need you to respect that. Thank you. Gary?
Yes, so on the issue of biodiversity net gain, very hot topic, of course. We will soon, so next year, following the passing of the Environment Act and once regulations and guidance finally come out from government, we've only just been consulted on draft guidance in the last few weeks. Planning authorities will be in the position where you are assessing whether every development is delivering a specific level of biodiversity net gain, and that will be against set what they call metrics, ways of calculating what the existing biodiversity of a site and what the proposed biodiversity of the site will be once the development has taken place. And so that we will soon be in that world. However, notes being passed to members, we are not in that situation at the moment. You know, a coordinated approach needs to take place. And so we'll be in a position to advise members when that legal requirement comes into effect during the course of next year. At the moment, we are left with meeting our local policies on ecology and the policy set out in the National Planning Policy Framework. And so our ecologist has assessed the application on that basis, and and doesn't object to the proposal. So whilst we will be in the world in the near future of specific calculations of biodiversity net gain, and whether the right metric has been used, we're not there yet. And as a local planning authority, it would be wrong for us to kind of jump the gun and anticipate that. There has been a recent appeal decision elsewhere in the country where a local planning authority sought to take that approach, and the inspector disagreed with it, because biodiversity net gain will be with us soon as a legal requirement, but it's just not with us at the moment.
My second question is a bit like Fabian's. 3 years ago, I sat on DCB when we determined the previous application to this. We've heard that not very little has changed in this application, and in the meantime, common land consent's been granted. So my question is, would it be, strange, were we, or to determine it differently unless members felt there were some material changes?
Yeah, in answer to that, of course, the committee is open to make whatever decision it feels to be reasonable. But I would say the reasonableness of a refusal, given the lack of any real change in the circumstances, and the only the recent expiry of the planning permission, I think it would be an unusual decision to make, and one that probably would not stand up at appeal.
But technically, it's a new application, isn't it? Technically,
it is. It's a new application, and obviously you have to give weight to all the material considerations. And I think the existence of that recent permission, albeit expired literally in the last few weeks, is something that we would recommend you give significant weight to.
Of course, but we're also not bound by the decisions of a previous committee.
Not completely bound, Chair, no.
Okay, good, thank you very much. Guy, and then Lorraine, please.
Wriggling away we are. Sorry, just in the interest of transparency, the note that was passed to me simply reads, the Council's Ecologist's report has not been published, which I would imagine is a matter of public record if it's true. My question just referred to how we should apply our minds to this idea of ancillary under policy DM17. Yeah, in terms of the actual application that's in front of us, it's as you say in the report, it's a three-part development, as it were. It's a cafe, it's the information boards, and it's the public toilets. I can see a strong argument for saying the information boards are ancillary to public use, but there are already boards there. I can completely see how the public toilets are ancillary. There are already public toilets there. It's the cafe that I think I'm finding the stumbling block, and I was wondering whether we were required to see the cafe as ancillary to use, or is it something that could be considered an enabling part of an overall development, as in the money from the cafe enables the things that will be ancillary to the development? Is that how we should see it, or do we need to find all three up?
So I've definitely taken that into account in my report, and noted that you're probably not going to get the enhanced public toilets without the cafe. They are linked. It's one proposal, and you have to take it on the whole. I've also noted that the cafe is probably the least ancillary of the three, but I do still believe that it is ancillary in that it would be linked to leisure use of the downs.
Okay, Lorraine.
Thank you, Annie, Chair. I think I've just got a couple of questions about the common land. I'm reading it as you were talking about that, and there is a link between the common land usage and planning, because you said there isn't a relationship, and it clearly says there is. So I just wanted to clarify what you meant by that.
So, were you still?
No, I did have another bit, but you can answer.
Okay. Yeah, I find it easiest to answer questions one at a time. So the Downs Act is separate from common land consent again, unfortunately. There's a lot of legislation going on here. But the Common Land Consent Process and the Downs Act are both non-planning legislation.
Yeah, it's so okay. But I think there's something about the Downs is quite a unique area, and you mentioned in your presentation about the fact that it's conservation land as well. So that's accurate, yeah. That it's okay. So there's something about building on conservation land when there is no need to, because who's asking for a cafe, for example, and for it to be erected on green spaces. And I think I'm just curious, because we're getting into a situation where green spaces are being commercialized, and whenever my head says this, because I'm new to planning, that once we start erecting permanent buildings outside of a toilet, which has been there for a long time, then the next thing you know, we're building and building and building. So I'm a bit concerned about developing protected green spaces into commercial use, and then where it could lead to. And if you're setting a precedent, I'm not saying that this is part of planning. My views may not be part of planning regulations, but I just wanted it to be noted that I think we're going down a slippery slope almost. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. I think, go back, one of the key aspects of any planning decision is each case on its individual merits. So a decision on one application doesn't set a precedent for another. And so in this case, the assessment has to be against, development on important open space has to be ancillary to it, and so you'll be aware our advice is that we feel that this is, but it doesn't provide a green light for other development. Any other proposals would also have to go through the same test, really, and we think the situation here is fairly unique. I mean, the kind of the status of important open space doesn't mean that they can't ever be developed on the green space. It just has to pass that ancillary test, which we feel that it does, which is consistent with the committee view just over 3 years ago, really. And then the reference to conservation, that's more a kind of has to preserve or enhance the character of that conservation area. And again, similar to the assessment previously carried out, we feel that it does too, really. So I think my main kind of response is that each case has to be determined on its own merits, and our advice is consistent with both our advice 3 years ago and the decision that followed it, really.
Could you, because I can't find anything in the visuals to make a sort of a clear demonstration of the different footprint of the new proposed building and the old one. Do you have something there that you could show us what the comparison is?
Yeah, I think it's shown on this plan here, which I appreciate. I don't know if you can see it slightly clearer than me. The dotted red line at the top of the plan is the public toilets currently, and you can see the proposed building to the south of that.
Can you say that again?
So the dotted red line at the top of the plan is the existing toilet block.
Right.
And the proposal is just beneath that. I think the comparison in terms of area is it's about the proposed building, including the decking, is about double the size of the existing toilet block.
Okay. Katja, and then did you remember your question, Andrew?
There was talk about an ecological survey. Is it? There's also seems to have gone missing, and I can't seem to find it in the papers either. Is there? I know it's not necessarily in the rules, as in what's going to happen in a year's time, but is an assessment done how it's going to damage the environment, building this building, the biodiversity in the local area?
Yeah, there is a report and it's published online. I didn't include it in the papers because it's quite long. It's probably about 40, 50 pages. So.
And what was the summary of it? If you could just summarise it, just for my clearness.
So the summary is that the development can be undertaken in a way that preserves nature surrounding the site, but also that the development can deliver a net gain for biodiversity.
Okay. Leslie?
I've always understood, simply because I was told, that the reason the council didn't put street lights in its parks was because it had of its effect on the wildlife, as in light pollution. So has that been considered, even if the report isn't due out from the government until next year? And I've got one other question.
Should I take that one first?
You take one.
There is a condition on the permission in relation to submission of a lighting strategy prior to construction of the building. So the applicant would provide details of lighting for the site and what levels of light pollution that would provide to the surrounding environment. So we are looking at that very carefully. But also the opening hours of the cafe don't extend into the evening. So the majority of the year, the cafe will be closed before hours of darkness in any case. So.
And the second one is, why don't we just charge for using the loos and have just loos? I mean, I know it's gone past the old spend a penny, and it's probably a bit more now, but it doesn't have to be that expensive. And if there are a lot of people on the downs, as there are in summer, that would bring in a fair old income.
I can respond to that, Chair. A proposal based upon that principle would be a different proposal. So we've got to determine the application before us.
Andrew, did you remember your question?
No.
Yeah.
So I remembered my other question and I've got a further one. So following on from that diagram that you asked to be put up, Chair, I was wondering why, or do we know why they're not seeking to build the new building completely over the existing footprint of the previous building?
I'm not 100% categorically certain because I didn't design the building. We did look at the position of the building quite a lot during the planning process. It was originally closer to the seawall's viewing point. There was a previous application before the previous one that was withdrawn, but we felt that was too prominent in that position close to the viewpoint. So we wanted it shifted away towards the existing footprint of the toilets. And behind the tree line, but it's a careful balance because you've got the dwelling to the north, the house, and we didn't want to get too close to the house either. So the position has been considered sensitively, and we've arrived at this point where it's close to the existing footprint, but not quite on it.
Thanks. Yeah, it just struck me that when it comes to talking about the net gain or the net loss, depending. If it was over the existing footprint, that would probably have an impact on that calculation. But that's thanks for your answer. The other question was there was a reference in the report to an additional footpath to reflect the fact there's a likely desire line. I assume that's gone nowhere, and if pardon the pun, but I assume that's gone nowhere, and that if that was to be something that was thought necessary in future, that would that require further planning, or?
It probably wouldn't require planning permission, but it might get caught up in the Downs Act process, which is a separate issue. The highways officer did suggest that desire line does exist to the north of the site. We were quite reticent to introduce more concrete across the downs, so we kind of thought we'd go with this proposal, see how it goes. If a footpath is essential, that can be considered at a later date. But I think the sort of grass there, the muddy grass, should hopefully be enough to deter people at certain times and things. The proposals do include a condition to secure resurfacing of the existing footpath to access the site. So that footpath will be improved as part of the proposals.
I've got a question about the education booth or centre, whatever it is. Like how crucial and critical is it to their viability to have that there? Because that adds a lot of footprint that seems a bit arguably surplus to requirements.
I'm not sure how that influences the viability of the proposals. I think it's more the benefit that's associated with that, in that it is a relatively small part of the proposals. I think it's 7 square meters of the building, so it's really quite a small aspect. I think it's a few meters wide, so it doesn't add a lot of extra area to the building, but the benefits that could offer in terms of education about nature conservation and nature on the downs could be really significant. So we felt that was a good inclusion in the proposals.
I can't help but wonder if the cafe space could be utilised for that, because most of the time, hopefully, the weather would be good enough for people to be outside doing the education. But I also have also wondering about how many toilets are in the current toilet block, because there's 4 toilets, one of them being an accessible toilet in this design. But it's not clear how many are in the current block. Whether or not it's like a net gain or loss in terms of actual cubicles.
I think there probably would be a reduction in terms of the number. I'm not sure off the top of my head how many exactly how many toilets there are in the existing building, but I expect there would be a reduction because there's separate male and female facilities, whereas there are 3 unisex toilets in this scenario and 1 accessible one. I think the key point we thought was that the upgrade of the toilets and the fact they're brand new facilities, whereas the existing ones are quite aged, would be the benefit there.
And in terms of the operating time, would they be open 24/7 or only at the times that the cafe itself is open?
So they are 24/7, yeah.
Thank you. Do you have any more questions, or shall we move to a debate? No? Okay, we'll move to a debate. I'll start off. I must admit, I was quite excited by this because I love a public toilet and I like being able to use a toilet when I'm on the downs. However, I'm not compelled to be convinced why it needs to double its footprint to have this. So I don't personally feel like I'm going to vote for it at this stage. Who else would like to? Richard, and then Guy, and then Fabian.
There's no doubt that if this had happened before now, houses would be built all over it by the 50s. But with respect to the good people of Sneyd Park, for example, the Downs don't just serve Sneyd Park. People from all over Bristol and beyond go there. People from Bishopsworth, Harcliffe, Stockwood, St George, Henleys, Braintree, Avonmouth. And this facility, in my view, will actually meet their needs and actually provide funding to allow the owners of the Downs to actually maintain it better. The original application we discussed long and hard 3 years ago. I remember asking probing questions then, but we were overwhelmingly convinced it was a decent scheme. I believe it is now. It hasn't changed materially. If anything, I think post-COVID, the demand for it and to open it, this open green line to the people of Bristol is even more vibrant. So I urge members to vote for this.
Guy, then Fabian, then Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. Discord on the committee already. I do sympathise, and I do, as yourself, Chair, I love a good public toilet. It would be great to have some more up there. But there are public toilets there already. In fact, there are 2 lots of public toilets. And the information boards would be great, but there are already information boards there. So what I'm left with is the cafe. And do I feel the cafe would be ancillary in and of itself? Ish. But a bigger cafe might be more ancillary. Restaurant might be even more ancillary than that. And when you start going down that road, I agree with Councillor Francis. Where do you stop? If you're just building things to make money to facilitate the things that might be ancillary, that are ancillary. I'm also very concerned at the moment. Currently, there's a load of trees screening the back of the proposed development from the gorge. Of course, if those trees weren't there, it would be quite a spectacular view of the gorge, I would imagine, from that particular spot. And if we start granting things because they raise enough money to be ancillary, or to provide ancillary things to that open space, I'm wondering, and I'm a bit worried about where that might end. So at the moment, I'm afraid the balance hasn't quite been struck with me. I don't think it's quite worth it. My mind's still open, could still be convinced, but at the moment, I think I'm voting against.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, the problem for me, I wasn't on this DC 3 years ago, I was on the other one, but the issue for me is if there's been no significant material changes since the last time this was granted, we're going to be on very thin ice if we refuse it now and we then find that we get absolutely rinsed at planning appeal. We do know that the common land permission has been sorted out now. And also, you know, aesthetically, I think the new building is an improvement on the old. I think the old toilet block, it looks quite hideous and is quite, you know, almost unsafe. I also think that, you know, with cuts in government, you know, funding and the fact that, you know, new ways of paying for services and providing services and funding them has to be found. So having a cafe to basically subsidise public toilets that's the kind of thing people are going to be having to think about. You know, those are the kind of options that are going to be coming forward. I also think that for people across the city who already come to the Downs, I don't think this is going to suddenly increase the number of people who come to the Downs. No one's going to get the 2 or 3 buses over there just because there's a new cafe there. But if people are already visiting, if they already come to the Downs on a regular basis, it's going to enhance their experience because it's going to give them a chance, you know, and if they're not in the best of health, you think about the equalities issues, if they're older, not in the best of health, they need to sit down and have a break, have a cup of tea. This will enable that to happen rather than just having to sort of sit on the ground or, you know, or these, you know, use these the current. I mean, from the outside, the current loos look absolutely hideous. But so I think, given got permission 3 years ago, I think without any significant changes in the planning rules and the planning laws, we don't have the grounds to refuse it. So I respect those who are concerned about what could happen next, but any future applications have to be dealt with on their own merits and can be refused or whatever on their own merits. I don't think I don't think appeal-wise we have a leg to stand on in refusing it. I do think it could potentially, I think it will significantly enhance the visitor experience for those who already come here. I don't think it's going to attract more people. But I do think, and I also think it's a huge improvement on the building that it will replace, which is pretty much a blot on the landscape, even if it is hidden by trees. I think this is a huge improvement aesthetically, so I will be supporting it. That's not to disrespect those who opposed it, but I do think that, you know, precedent's been set with the last application, and on the whole, I think it's a better building than the one it replaces.
Yeah, I agree pretty much with Fabian. I was up there a couple of Sundays ago, albeit it was unfeasibly warm, or unusually warm for mid-March Sunday. But there was an ice cream fan there doing rip-roaring trade, so there's already, at least some demonstration of a market for sweet treats, potentially. And as Fabian says, the existing toilet block is pretty unappealing. So this would have been a slightly easier sell to me had it sort of been on the footprint of the existing building, but notwithstanding that, I'll be supporting.
Lorraine?
Yeah, thank you. I think I just wanted to reiterate what I said before, really. Whether it's planning legislation or not, this is just an opportunity to sort of stand up for the right of the environment. We don't want to be increasing car usage. We don't want people to have to be travelling for miles and miles and miles just to get to the Downs. We don't know who has said having a cafe is viable, who wants a cafe there. Do you know what I mean? It's all those stuff, because it's all right to say this is a planning application for a building, but who's asking for a cafe to be built there, particularly? Do you know what I mean? And why do we need more toilets if there are already toilets there? It doesn't really make much sense, because I think that the lady in the residence said she uses a toilet regularly and she's not necessarily having a problem using them. So, do we knock down old buildings because they no longer fit the environment, or do we sort of maintain what we have there? So I know that's not necessarily part of the planning sort of considerations, but I think thinking about it environmentally, the footfall, the kind of what happens if no one uses the cafe, you're left with this elephant in the middle of the park, the green space, etc. So those are just emotive stuff, not necessarily planning stuff, but I just wanted to say it. Thank you.
Thank you. As I said previously, love a public toilet. This is, visually it's an improvement. It's a prettier looking building than what's there. That can't be debated or denied. I'm just not convinced by the education in terms of what's changed. The whole world has changed in the last 3 years. Like the things that we need and require from our public spaces has changed. And as Guy sort of pointed out, there are good information boards already there, which people will look at as they are walking around the outside of the Downs, which is why people are there in the first place. There's an argument perhaps for mobile cafe provision up there, maybe a tiny cafe booth on the side of a refurbished or rebuilt toilet block on the same footprint. But I'm just not convinced that the sort of biodiversity loss is worth it, for a double the footprint. And I'd actually like to just see more toilets because that's the critical thing that we actually need lots of. So I'm not going to vote for it. I can't support it, unfortunately. But I'd like to move to a vote if nobody else has a...
Could I move the officer's recommendation to approve, please?
You can. We will require a seconder for that. Andrew? Yep. Okay, so all those in favour of the officer's recommendation to approve, please raise your hand. That's 4. All those against? That's 5 of us. Any abstentions? No. Okay, so the officer's recommendation has fallen. Would anybody like to give me an alternative motion?
In the absence of anyone else putting their hands in the air, I'd like to ask the planning officer if he has any recommendations or would like to clarify from the discussion that he's heard what might be grounds for refusal.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Chair, our recommendation, our report's clear. We unfortunately can't give advice on the hoof, and the reasons have to come from the members. And so, the convention is that the once the officer recommendation hasn't survived the motion, that the normal course of action would be for the committee to defer a decision for next time for a report back on what a reason for refusal could constitute. But ahead of that, we need to hear from members what they feel that might be.
I mean, what I heard from the committee was obviously a concern about the biodiversity and the sort of almost doubled footprint being a concern, and I think probably it wasn't compelling as to why the education centre was needed, because that was something that was raised in the public consultation as well. I don't know whatever thought. Guy?
I think my principal concern is what I heard from a couple of the other speeches as well, was around, is it ancillary? Or what's the balance of the ancillary nature of the development proposed? And for me, that didn't quite make it. I'd certainly be happy to move a motion in terms of the normal protocol of this committee, that is to say, to defer until the next meeting of this committee to give the officers a chance to put those concerns in policy terms as clearly as possible. If anyone would like to second, you're more than welcome.
I will second that if that's enough for you, Gary.
Yes, that's fine, Chair. That's something to go on. Thank you.
Okay, so a vote to defer. All those in favour, please. Five. I think it's five of us. No, it's five. Yeah. And then against motion to defer. That's 3. And then abstentions. Okay, we're voting to defer it. So.
Well, 5 have already
Nothing.
voted for it, so it's going.
It's deferred anyway.
So there's a
I
majority
want an
vote in
abstain
favour.
because I'm not really a bit confused as to why.
Chair,
Okay,
is
that's
it
great.
possible, if we're going to defer it, you know, concerns been raised about the size of the site, to see, you know, whether there's time for a smaller proposal, maybe shave off, if you know, the education site and shove everything back towards the side of the old toilet block a bit more. That might
Oh, I mean, the
still
architects here
provide still provide the commercial subsidy for the toilets, which I suspect is going to be essential.
Yeah, well, we can't start redesigning it for them now, so...
No, but that's
they-
something that you know, maybe officers wanted to talk to the applicants about during the period of deferral. Rather than just simply using the period of deferral to simply come up with reasons to refusal, see if that time can also be used to see if a varied scheme can come up that is more acceptable to those who are uncertain today.
Well, Gary?
Yeah, so in our plan will be to assume the scheme won't change and to come back with a reason for refusal. However, obviously the applicant's architect is in the room, and I'm sure if hearing this, there is at the end of this long history of the proposals, there's another scheme that could be submitted that would come in and we'd report back on it. But and we'll see if that happens. But I think our plan at the moment will be to report back on the current scheme.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And the architect's obviously here listening to our conversation and everything. So thank you very much for attending the meeting. Also, this is David's last day with us, or last committee. Not quite the result you wanted, but thank you very much for your time.
No. Yeah, thank you.
Do you want to give a round of applause for David for...
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That brings it to a close. Our next committee is on the 18th of May, I believe. Thank you. Bye-bye.